Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna. I'm a journalist and the founder of Smarter News. And I thought I would just jump on real quick here to provide a debrief for the interview that Vice President Harris participated in last night. It is her first interview as a presidential nominee. And for that reason, it is newsworthy and important. We typically are not going to debrief after every single interview a presidential candidate does. But in this particular case, it matters because things have changed so quickly in this campaign. We started the summer with one candidate at the top of the ticket for the Democratic Party. Now we're ending summer with a new candidate who's only been in this role for a few weeks. And in the last few weeks, Vice President Harris has done many things. She's traveled all over the country. She has participated in a myriad of different campaign events. She has headlined the Democratic National Convention last week, but we had yet to see her in an interview with a member of the press. And this is important for several reasons. Sure, there were her critics who were suggesting that she was purposely avoiding the press. And there are even her supporters, perhaps, that were getting concerned to not see her in a different setting. But as a journalist and a member of the American media, one of the reasons why we want our candidates or any elected officials to interface with the press is at its purest form. The press is going to be a representation of the people. We're here to serve the people, to provide you access to candidates for office, to try to gather information that can be helpful to you as a voter. So, really, when someone is avoiding the press, it can also be viewed as avoiding the people. And this is why an interaction with the press or relationship matters. This is why in a place like America, there's nothing in the Constitution to say that we have to do press briefings every day, but we've seen several White Houses now do that because it's part of the practice to build a relationship with the press. It can be done strategically for different reasons, of course, too. But I'm just thinking at a real basic level, at a pure level. A free press represents the people who have the liberty to think freely and choose freely for themselves. So we want to see the press interact with elected officials or those who are seeking higher office. And this is why this interview matters because it's the first time we've seen this from Vice President Harris as a presidential nominee. So there were all sorts of questions as to what would happen. Also, we know that interviews are a different format than delivering a speech on a stage. You are going to likely confront questions or topics that you do not typically want to confront. And how you react to those questions, not only in substance, but in style, matters to the people. So we were carefully watching this interview. I was carefully watching this interview and I was curious to see what news would we actually get. So in this short format, I just want to do a couple takeaways for you. I have one headline and I have two takeaways. I have three sound bites to get you caught up. I also am going to include links so that you can watch the entire interview for yourself as well. So let's start with the headline. What's the big headline here? We understand why this interview matters, but what's the big headline? The big headline to me is that there's actually no big headline. That's actually one of the big takeaways from this interview. There's no big headline. There wasn't a huge gaffe where she made some incredible mistake that now is going to stick with her for the rest of the campaign. There was not a moment of great achievement or victory or a soundbite that is suddenly going to set the campaign on a new trail and is going to be shared all over the world. So we didn't have a high, we didn't have a low. The interview didn't produce a ton of headlines. It produced a smattering of different information. And part of that is because of the format of the interview that was filmed. It was a taped interview. It was conducted, I should mention as well, with the vice presidential nominee, the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. I'm not going to discuss too much of what he had to say. I'm going to really focus on the presidential candidate at the moment. But it was a taped interview, and we don't have a lot of insight as to what was the agreement. Was the interview for 30 minutes and the public got to see, roughly 25? Was the interview an hour and perhaps we may see more sound bites? From what I understand from what's been reported, the total length of the interview that we were able to see was about 26 minutes long. And so with a taped interview, we have to know that it wasn't live to tape. We don't know everything that perhaps took place because there were edits. It was aired in two separate parts. There were filmed introductions and then the substance of the interview. And CNN had a little time to produce it between when it was filmed and when it was aired. Not a ton of time, but some time. And so with a format like that, there is pressure on the journalist conducting it. In this case, Dana Bash, who's the chief political correspondent for CNN and an anchor, to do several things. Because it's the first interview, she's going to want to cover But when you want to cover a lot of topics, that doesn't give you a ton of time for follow up. And typically, follow up, when you actually press someone for a little bit more detail, for a little bit more substance, is where you may get something more. So, part of the reason why perhaps we didn't see some highs and lows that were super dramatic is because the interview was quick paced. It covered a lot of ground. And there was a little bit of pushback, which I'm going to share with you in just a moment, but there wasn't the allowance for the time for that. So format mattered here for this interview. There's no super big headline that if you don't know, you're suddenly missing. The fact that it was steady could be viewed as both a win and a loss. For Vice President Harris, it's a win in that there were, again, no major gaffes that could be super disruptive to her campaign, but there were no major victories, which will lead to more questions. So now she's done the first interview. Now there's going to be more questions about what she said in this interview in the future. One of the things I've noticed interviewing presidential candidates over the years is that sometimes the most basic questions are the ones that the campaigns are typically not the most prepared for, or they're prepared for, but they can be problematic. And these would be the most basic questions for many of us. Why do you want to be president, for example? I've asked presidential candidates that for years, and you should see the look on their face. Sometimes it's like a deer in a headlight because it's the most basic question. You better have a good answer for that one. And it can be challenging, as we know, sometimes to answer some of the most basic questions in our own lives. So I want to play a quick soundbite for you. This is the very first question that was asked in the interview. And this also exemplifies what I was talking about in that there's no highs and lows, but perhaps more questions to come. The question was very simple, and it was the answer to this question that's actually getting a lot of attention after the interview took place.
You are elected, what would you do on day one in the White House?
Well, there are a number of things. I will tell you, first and foremost, one of my highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward. In a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism. I think, sadly, in the last decade, we have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation, and I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
So what would you do day one?
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy. I've already laid out a number of proposals in that regard, which include what we're going to do to bring down the cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses, what we're going to do to invest in families, for example, extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life, to help them buy a car seat, to help them buy baby clothes, a crib. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now. So there are a number of things on day one.
So that was the first question of the interview. And you can see by the way that the question was managed, there both was an answer provided and several more questions that could come after it. So let's move to the takeaways then. What were the two takeaways from the interview? And I'd like to put these in the category of what did we learn? If there's something what did we learn from this interview? The first thing that we learned based on the way that Vice President Harris answered some of these questions, and you can see it in this first one, is that she is prepared to attack former President Trump. We saw that in her convention address. We're seeing that in her answers here. And this is going to be part of the way she's going to speak to the American people. She is less prepared to talk about her policy. And I want you to listen to how she answers some further questions about the economy to exemplify this point.
You call it the opportunity economy. You are well aware that right now many Americans are struggling. There's a crisis of affordability. Yeah. One of your campaign themes is we're not going back. But I wonder what you say to voters who do want to go back when it comes to the economy specifically, because their groceries were less expensive, housing was more affordable when Donald Trump was president.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, it, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. Uh, I mean, literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis. When we came in, our highest priority was to do what we could to rescue America.
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy.
So you can see how that question was answered. It started with, listen, things were a mess under former President Trump, and we had to navigate through that before getting to here's the things that we're going to really work on. Then she was pushed by Dana Bash, to Dana Bash's credit there. Well, why haven't you done that? And she said, well, we had to get this recovery taken care of. So you can see the framing of the way that these answers are going to come. It's going to be remember where we were and how much we didn't like it, and you don't want to go back there. And then as it turns to, well, what are the new solutions? What are some of the new policies? By the way, she does speak a little bit about some of what she's describing as victories, like bringing down the cost of certain medication, bringing down inflation that the Biden administration is trying to tout as a victory, although we know that inflation is still an issue that the economy is dealing with. So you could see the framing. So this happened around the answers to the economy, and it also happened around the discussion of the border. And that's the second thing that I think we learned, or the second takeaway. One of the strongest sound bites from Vice President Harris actually was on the border. And she was asked several questions about border security. She says she believes in America's law and that she has been enforcing the law for years as a prosecutor. So I think one of the things we're learning from this interview is that not only are there going to be a focus, or there's going to be continual focus on former President Trump and attacks on him and critiques on him, but also trying to elevate Vice President Harris's time as a prosecutor over her time as an elected official. And so listen to how she's discussing the border and how she's framing her stance on the border overall.
I believe there should be consequence. We have laws that have to be followed and enforced that address and deal with people who cross our border illegally, and there should be consequence. And let's be clear, in this race, I'm the only person who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations who traffic in guns, drugs, and human beings. I'm the only person in this race who actually served a border state as Attorney General to enforce our laws, and I would enforce our laws as president going forward. I recognize the problem.
So notice the framework of that answer. It's a framing based on her time as a prosecutor, as an attorney, and not focusing on her time currently in the White House. And so whether or not that's going to work for voters is a question. The border is a very interesting story, as we've discussed on Smarter News. We follow the border numbers every single month for a reason. We know in politically heated times, the border becomes a major issue. And it is true that during the Biden administration, we have seen a record number of encounters at the U.S. southern border. It is also true in recent months that we've seen a decline, that Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection has attributed to an executive action that's temporary that was taken by President Biden. Republicans say that action is just moving numbers around, that it's not really a decline. So we'll see how close voters really want to be to this issue, how much they're really going to dig in, and how much this matters to them. But those are the two things I think we've learned from this interview. Number one, Vice President Harris is ready to go after President Trump. And number two, her time as a prosecutor and positioning herself in that way is going to be important, if not more important, than her time as vice president. So this is an interesting takeaway to know ahead of a presidential debate that we expect on September 10th between the two candidates. And we have a little bit of an insight perhaps on some of the playbook of Vice President Harris. And of course, we've seen former President Trump on a debate stage already with President Biden. We'll see what his strategy is confronting Vice President Harris. And we'll have plenty of time to talk about that when the time comes. One thing I would just offer for you to consider based on my reporting on Smarter News and my interaction with you, really could be seen as advice for both campaigns. And it's something I think about a lot as we're trying to figure out how best to serve you during this time. It seems abundantly clear from all of you that politics as usual isn't going to cut it, and that you actually want more substance than headlines or quick taglines. You want a deeper conversation about the economy, about national security, about America's identity. You actually want more, not less, and want more time with people so that you can get some more information, like peel back the layers and find out, well, what is it that you actually stand for? Both campaigns right now, although they can say they're making themselves accessible on the campaign trail, haven't necessarily provided those super in-depth policy conversations that will allow people to really understand what is going to happen if you're elected. And let me give you an example. I asked on our Instagram account, what would be some of the questions? If you had one question that you can ask Vice President Harris, what would it be? And listen to what some of you would like to hear from her. What achievement as Vice President are you most proud of, and why? What are you going to do to make our country and cities safer? No fluff, please. You added that caveat. How would the next 4 years look different than the previous? And how would they look the same? How do you plan to secure the borders? I like this as a kicker. What's one kind thing you can say about former President Trump? Those questions are usually asked at the end of a debate when everyone's done yelling at each other. And then it gives us a moment of like, oh, they can say something nice about each other. Although sometimes it can also backfire because it's usually like, they're a great dad. Or they love their family. That's always something you just words to the wise. If you get that question, you could always say that. You know what? It's clear that he or she loves her family. Just just like just like I do, something like that. But I do think that's one of the things I've learned over the years reporting, through now. This is our second presidential cycle on Smarter News. Is that people actually they want details, they want specifics, and I don't know if the news sort of feels like, well, it's going to be too boring. It's going to be too much. We're not going to get the viewers. If I had the option, I would ask, can we sit down? Can we have can we do an hour live to tape or live in front of an audience about the economy? Like just about the economy and cover all aspects of it, whether it's inflation or jobs or supply chain or manufacturing overseas or a relationship with Mexico, our largest trading partner, like really dig in because people are able to learn from that and people want to learn. They are anxious for more information. They don't want it less information. They actually want more information. And instead we just have a lot of clutter, and that produces a lot of anxiety because it seems like there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of words, but the substance isn't there. And so I noticed that we could look at both of the major parties' conventions, and we could look at what's being said in the campaign trail and the sort of interviews that are being done and say, okay, there's some access happening now with the press, and there's a lot of different interviews being done and a lot of different events, but are we really getting to the substance that voters really need to be moved and to be inspired and to have hope and hope enough to like believe in somebody else in their mission? So I always am going to look for that. Again, it's wonderful to be able to do reporting and interact with you on a regular basis because your feedback is so important to not only what we look for so that we could better serve you, but also to understand, well, how does the American public really feel right now? Because at the end of the day, whether you're president or you're the member of the press, your job is to serve the American people, something we actually have in common. So hopefully this was helpful for you. Just a couple quick takeaways from this interview. Again, we may see others. We'll see, is this the start of a series of interviews that Vice President Harris does? Or is this a one-off and then we're really going to wait to the debate? It's something else we should watch for former President Trump as well. And we got a lot coming up after Labor Day going into September. So I'm excited to be part of this time with you. And thank you for your support of Smarter News and quick, concise, nonpartisan information, which is what we're dedicated for. So have a great day wherever you are, and we'll see you right back here on Smarter News. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.